Hey there guys, I am the Six Machine and welcome back to another Warhammer video. GW have, in a completely shocking announcement to be honest, released what is possibly one of the best updates they have ever done. Seriously, every single thing in this update is great, absolutely great for 40k. And if you weren't aware, there has been a big balance data slate is what they're calling it, which affects a lot, not all, but a lot of the armies in the game right now and brings some much needed balance to a lot of the stronger factions in the game. They do also mention that these sort of things will be part of a brand new quarterly update that they'll be doing, much like the FAQs, just to help tighten up the rules and clarify various things to help keep the game in a more constant, balanced state over the course of a year rather than having to wait for the end of year chapter approved kind of things, although they will still be doing the end of year chapter approved. This is just in addition to that. So honestly, I am super hyped for this, and as I said, I think it's one of the best moves that GW has made in a very long time. So let's dive straight in and see what updates have come. Just as a quick aside, I won't be going in too deep onto the actual points changes, but I will be showing the updated points on the screen so you can take a look and we'll have a quick chat about them in general. But really, what I think they have done with the points changes is they've done a really good job of reining in the overly oppressive units in the various codexes, the Drukhari and the Admech, that they've done the points changes for without nerfing the factions like completely outright. So all in all, again, a very positive step from GW. In terms of the actual mechanical changes to the game though, first up we have got flyers. So there is now a limit on the number that you can bring, and as you can see, with a combat patrol or incursion game it's 1, for strike force games it's 2, and for onslaught games it is 3. And this is a really great way of limiting some of those armies like the Admech and the Orks that have really strong flyers, and they can spam them even in smaller games and even bypass things like the rule of 3 by having multiple data sheets for things like the Ork Dakka Jet and the Wasborn Blaster Jet and that sort of thing. I also think this is a really great change because it fits more thematically, especially at smaller games. Seeing, 3 or 4 or 5 flyers across the board just didn't really make sense to me, and this change now brings the focus back to the infantry and the boots on the ground and having those vehicles and sort of men, rather than just having a essentially scaled up game of Aeronautica Imperialis, which is what a lot of games between things like Orks and Admech seemed to turn into. Next up we have the forces of the Astra Militarum, who are, let's be honest, rather flagging in 9th edition. They got some very welcome buffs in that the Leman Russ now has a 2-up save, making it much more durable and harkening back to the old AV14 on the front that it used to have back in 7th edition and before. And then on top of that, you can now give tank orders from your tank commander to any non-Titanic vehicles. So you can now buff things like basilisks or manticores and other artillery, and not just other Leman Russ tanks. And this really does bring a huge amount of value to those other vehicles, and also again kind of makes sense. You would expect a tank commander to be able to command, all kinds of tanks, not just the same type that he's driving. The Astra Militarum also get an update to the command ability, the Voice of Command, and now instead of just choosing one target unit, it now acts as a sort of aura, and you can now issue it to one or more other friendly infantry units within 6 inches. So now it is very much more in line with the aura abilities of things like lieutenants and space marine captains, which again, it makes sense to be fair. It fits thematically and narratively and logically that this guy shouting orders would be shouting them to all of the squads around him, and it will definitely help to make the Astra Militarum feel like that combined arms force once again, with all of their weaker separate individual squads working together and combining their firepower or whatever the order may be to act as one unified force. So I think this is a really good set of thematic and also rules changes that will help the Astra Militarum keep going just until they do get their new codex. Up next, the Chaos Marines got... no, they didn't get 2 wounds. It's weird, I don't know why GW seems so reluctant to do that, but they do have their new codex coming next year. We've got that confirmed, so I guess GW just wanted to wait for that and figured that the Chaos players could wait a little bit more. It's not like you've been waiting for 3 years or whatever already, but what they did get is a change to the Death to the False Emperor, which now gives them exploding sixes against every enemy, not just forces of the Imperium. So this will honestly give your Chaos forces a huge boost in their damage output against all the other non-Imperium forces in the game, so all of those Xenos factions and other Chaos forces and that sort of thing. You will now at least not feel like you are stuck with just a completely wasted special rule. It is a positive change, I will be honest though. I expect this rule to maybe stay like this with the exploding sixes, but get a name change in the new codex to better suit the kind of fact that it works against everything and not just the Imperium. Death to the False Emperor doesn't really make sense when you're hitting an Ork or whatever, but as I said, it's really nice to have and definitely works as at least a decent little stopgap while you wait for the new Chaos Codex next year. Both Imperial and Chaos Knights got a genuinely huge buff to their small elite armies, in that not only do Armigers and War Dogs now get the objective secured rule like other armies' troop choices in a pure Knights list, which does give you a really solid way to keep those objectives and not have it stolen by, an annoying, lowly remaining Marine or Guardsman at the end of the game. And then on top of that, to make it even harder for your opponent to deny you objectives, Armigers and Knights now have the brand new Towering Foe rule, which means that Armigers count as 5 models for controlling objectives, and Titanic units, i.e. your Knights, count as 10. So you can now very much play the objective game with Knights in 9th edition and go after those points and, fight off that squad of Marines and have a pretty good chance of being able to steal that objective from them. It is a huge boost for the performance of Knights in 9th edition, and honestly something they should have had since day one, but it is better late than never, and this really will help you to run your pure Knights list and get more victory points and play the game as 9th edition is kind of meant to be played. It is a very objective, victory point focused game, and you can now really compete on that level a lot more effectively. Necrons also got a very overdue and very welcome buff in the simple change that a load of their units now have the core keyword. And perhaps as a downside of being the first 9th edition codex, the Necrons did suffer a lot in the lack of the core keyword throughout their book, which meant that so many rules and stratagems and abilities just flat out didn't work on a load of your units. But now they have given that all-important keyword to things like Wraiths and Flayed Ones and Destroyers and Praetorians, and even things like the Canthrites from Imperial Armor, so this will 100% give your entire army a huge amount more cohesion and buffing power from your various stratagems and rules. Just that one simple change does act as a massive force multiplier for your army going forward. And as I said, they probably should have had core on all of those units from day one, but it is good to see GW realizing that they perhaps left the Necrons a bit high and dry and making that change to help bring the codex more in line with the more current and the more recent 9th edition books. Up next, the Orks also got a change, but this one was a nerf, admittedly, although I will be honest, unless you are a competitive meta chaser going after the top tables, I really don't think it's a huge one. The new rules mean that you can now only have one unit of each of the buggies, so the Snaz Wagons, the Scrap Jets, the Squig Buggies, and that sort of thing. They still do come in squads of 1 to 3, so you can still have 3 of each in your list, it just means you can't bring 3 separate units of them and max them out to 3 to bring 9 Squig Buggies in your armies, which, I mean, let's be honest, was totally oppressive and, in my opinion, pretty un-orky as well. They're meant to have, this hodgepodge mishmash of different vehicles, and this really does help push that narrative theme more so than just running 9 of the same type. It is a nerf, to be sure, and I would maybe have preferred it if they had just said you couldn't have more than 3 of each of the buggies, so you could still run 3 individual units of 1 rather than being forced into 1 unit of 3. But still, all in all, it's a pretty reasonable change to rein in the oppressive buggy spam lists, and I still think that 3 of any of those buggies will bring you a lot of power to the table. They are still really quite strong and really good value for their points. So all in all, I don't think this change is that bad really, unless, as I said, you are pushing for like the top tables at tournaments. Now for the last 2 factions with changes, the Admech and the Drukhari, which arguably got the biggest changes in that they got a load of points changes. It's worth noting though that these are the upcoming chapter approved changes. They've just shown off these two early, so it's not like the other armies are off scot-free. I do fully expect other points changes for other armies come December, things like the Orks, the Sisters, the Marines and that sort of thing, but they have just chosen to show us the Drukhari and the Admech now because they are still very, very strong in 9th edition. And as you can see, there is a lot of big changes for both factions. They've done a whole A4 page of all the updated, and although everything on those two pictures that you can see now hasn't changed, there is a lot of stuff that has. Drukhari have had price hikes on their raiders, with the Dark Lance going up 15 points, Incubi and Witches both have gone up 2 points per model, and the much hated Succubus has gone up a massive 20 points. And likewise with the Admech, they've got some bumps to their always seen units, things like Rangers and Vanguard and the Ballistari have all gone up as well. As I said, I think they have done a really good job of just focusing these increases on those units that you always saw across you on the table, whilst not going overboard and nerfing the entire army. And indeed, there are a few things that actually got points drops in these changes, so things like the Ravagers and the Talos for the Drukhari and the big stompy robots for the Admech. So it isn't all just pure nerfs by any means. It is just a very, honestly, well balanced reining in of the more oppressive stuff in each of these armies, which I think is exactly what points adjustments should be. Not just going wild and flat out nerfing the whole army because a few things are powerful, but being meticulous and careful and having a bit more of a light touch when necessary to bring everything in line and bring it all to the same scale and the same power. Because let's be fair, none of these changes as they are hugely oppressive. I think in general 2000 points games, you're going to maybe be adding 100, 150 points to your list, which is, you know, a decent amount, but it's not going to completely neuter the sort of theme of your army or the way you want to play it. You're just going to have to be a bit more careful about how many models you bring in a particular unit, or what upgrades you give to a certain unit, or what upgrades you can afford for a vehicle. And you'll just have to be a bit more careful about how you plan out in the list building stage, which is perfectly fine in my opinion, and something that, as I said, points changes really should focus on doing. All in all, as I said, I think this is one of the best updates GW has ever done for 40k. I love all of the balance changes and trying to get the weaker factions more in line with the newer codexes, and I do think that if they can commit to doing them every quarter like they said, honestly, the game going forward should be in a much better position, both balance-wise and also for fun, because if you are playing an army like Tau or Astra Militarum at the moment, it's not always very fun when you're up against the Admech or the Drukhari, but with these quarterly changes, even if you are waiting for another year and a half for a codex, you know that at the very least you should be able to get a bit of a bump in your performance over the course of the next year, every quarter. But what do you think of these changes? Do you like them? Did they go too far, or did they not go far enough? Let me know in the comments below, and as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do like and subscribe for more Warhammer content from me, but until next time, I'll catch you later, guys.